Today I want to examine why you Chinese students behave the way you do. Okay? So believe it or not, but the way that you behave, the game that you're playing, it's strange, it's weird. So I'll point out 3 things that you do that don't really make any sense. The first thing that you do is you spend a lot of your time learning English. In fact, you probably spend more time learning English than you do learning Chinese. That's weird. And I've asked Chinese students before why they are so focused on learning English. And their answers usually are, I want to learn knowledge, I want to go abroad, I want to communicate, I want to use the internet. But that's not really a good explanation, okay? So that's one thing that's weird. Second thing that's weird is you're obsessed with making money, especially US dollars. Okay, and the third thing that's weird is that your goal in life is to immigrate to a Western country, specifically the United States, right? You all want to go to the United States for college, get a degree, and hopefully stay there, get a good job. But as we discussed before, that's strange because you are much higher status in China. You're much more likely to get a good job. You're much more likely to marry a beautiful woman than you are in the United States, where the game is rigged against you. Okay, so this sort of behavior is weird. If you think about it, what you should be really trying to do is master Chinese. Because once you master Chinese, and given your family background, given the fact that your family is often wealthy and well connected in China, you can climb up pretty high in China, okay? So if you learn Chinese, you're far better able to communicate yourself. You're far more likely to gain respect and status in China, okay? But instead you learn English. US dollars doesn't make any sense. What you really want is status. Right? What you really want is to be well respected. You want a prestigious job. You want to marry a beautiful woman. You want to have lots and lots of children. That's what you really want. But instead, you're really focused on obtaining US dollars. That's kind of strange. And then the last thing we said was immigration. If you go to the United States, it's really a rigged game against you, right? The most that you can hope to obtain is maybe become an engineer or professor if you're really, really smart, but you're not going to achieve political power. You're not going to become a CEO of a major company, all right? So the situation as it is, it's really weird where the best and brightest in China, they just want to be common people in the United States or Britain or Canada. So it's a really weird game. And so the question I want to look at today is, how was this game constructed? Why do we play this game? And the answer I will show you is because of the British. Okay? The British Empire created this game that ultimately the Americans inherit and which the entire world's played today because America is the global superpower. Okay, does that make sense? All right, so first I want to go into some history and explain to you how we got to where we are. So this is the map of the Spanish Empire at the height of its power. As you can see, the Spanish Empire covered the entire globe, okay? So this is a small nation in Spain, and it was able to really cover the entire world. So how was this accomplished? Okay, so the first thing you need to understand is that for most of its history, Europe was a very poor place. In order for it to obtain wealth, it had to trade with the world. Specifically, it wanted spices from what they call the East Indies, okay, Southeast Asia. At this time in history, the main power were the Muslims who are here, okay? And if you want to trade with East Asia, you have to go through the Muslims. And at this point in history, Spain is Muslim. It's a place called Andalusia. But then the Christians were able to reconquer Spain. And so the Muslims decided that we'll just blockade you. Or if you want to trade with us, we will charge you a lot of levies. Okay? And so now the Spanish and the Portuguese are forced to look for new routes to the East Indies, where the spices are. Remember, at this time in history, spices are the most valuable commodity. They're actually worth more than gold. Okay? I'm talking like cinnamon, nutmeg, peppercorn. Okay? These spices are extremely valuable commodities. In fact, one ship, if you're able to bring one ship of these spices back to Europe, well, you had intergenerational wealth. Okay? You become one of the wealthiest people in Europe. That's how valuable these spices were. And so now, the Spanish and the Portuguese have no choice but to discover new routes to the East Indies. So they went this way, and this is hard because Africa is not really hospitable. There are a lot of viruses, diseases in Africa. So they started to explore all around the world, and they went to North America and South America. And when they went to North and South America, they discovered that there were already peoples, the Aztecs, the Incas, living there. And they had a lot of wealth because these were empires, and they could be easily conquered. And so they set up these colonies all around South America, and a lot of silver was now being transported back to Spain. And so overnight, Spain became extremely wealthy. But as we discussed last class, if you become too wealthy and too powerful, you change as a people. Before you were energetic, you were open, you were cohesive. That's what made you an empire. But now because of all this wealth, you become insular. You become arrogant. And you become extremely close-minded. Okay, you become lazy. And so the Spanish, they had all this wealth, and they decided that they really want to work anymore. Okay, so what happened? Well, what happened was that they started to subcontract their labor to other places. Okay, so now what's going to happen is you will have the rise of England, French, and the Dutch Republic. Mainly, okay, to provide textiles, luxury goods to Spain, all right? So how this was accomplished was first, industry. So the Spanish, because they were so wealthy, didn't want to work. And their people didn't have to work either, okay? So, but they wanted to buy clothes, nice clothes. So what happened was they got other nations to be their factories, including Britain, the Dutch Republic, and France. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing that happened was trade. Okay, so the Spanish did engage in trade, but now that they're so wealthy, they could just hire the Dutch to do it. Okay, now the Dutch were responsible for going to the East Indies and bringing back the spices because it's a very dangerous job. Right? You could get sick, you could die along the way. You could also lose a lot of money. Okay? And the reason why the Dutch agreed to this is that the Dutch was basically a colony of the Spanish. So the Spanish had an empire, and the Dutch were part of this empire, so they just made the Dutch go do it for them. Okay? But the third thing that happened was piracy. Okay? So all this silver was being transported from the New World back to Spain. And what the English realized is, hey, we can just engage in piracy and steal this silver for ourselves. Okay? All right, so now the English became very wealthy because of piracy. Okay, and the most famous pirate of this time, of course, was Sir Francis Drake. And he worked directly under the monarch, Elizabeth I. Okay, so this was a state-sponsored piracy that made Britain very wealthy. Okay, so now you have this divergence where, okay, you have the Spanish Empire, and because of their wealth, they became lazy, insular, and arrogant. Or the word we use is hubris. Okay, lazy is you just make others do it for you, okay? Insular just means that now, as we discussed last class, the Spanish aren't concerned about other nations. They think they're invincible, so they engage in court politics. Okay? They're all infighting for the throne. The last thing is arrogant hubris, which basically means that you believe you are invincible. You can do whatever you want, and therefore you start all these wars against everyone, everywhere. You overextend yourself, and you don't really understand your limitations as an empire. So very quickly, even though Spain becomes very wealthy very fast, they also go bankrupt very fast because they're fighting too many wars, they're spending too much money that they don't have. Okay, and they're too corrupt. Okay, does that make sense? Now, and because of this, what's happening is that the British, England, the Dutch, and the French, they are slowly becoming a much more energetic, open, and cohesive society. Cohesion, okay? And now that you have this differentiation, what's going to happen is that their religion is going to change. Okay? So Spain remains Catholic. And it's going to fight to control the Vatican. And this, okay? So that's what Spain does. Now, Britain and the Dutch need to differentiate themselves from Spain. And so they become Protestant, or we call Calvinist. Okay? So Catholic is really about obeying authority. But the Protestant, the Calvinist religion insists on hard work, on energy, on obtaining wealth. Okay? The problem, though, is that the Spanish are too powerful. And the French, some of them are Calvinist, but most are Catholic. Okay? So what's going to happen is that the English and the Dutch are going to decide to join forces. Okay? So I want to very quickly show you the difference between the Catholic religion and the Protestant religion. Okay? So these are the Spanish. And as you can see, there's a lot of trade going between the New World and Spain. Why is this the case? Because Spain is extracting resources from the New World, primarily silver. Okay? The French are also engaged in trade as well. So what they really want is fur from North America. So fur is considered a luxury at that time. But as you can see from this map, the people that are really engaged in trade, engaged in piracy, in trade, in shipping, are the British, okay, and the Dutch. And the reason why is that they're poor, okay? And so through this hard work, they become very wealthy very quickly. In fact, the Dutch, become the wealthiest nation in the world per capita. You have this burgeoning of the middle class. And so what happens now is that the Spanish and the Dutch come into conflict. Because remember, the Dutch are a colony of the Spanish. And so the Spaniards want the Dutch to pay more taxes, and the Dutch want to be more independent. So this starts a series of wars, okay? In fact, an entire series of wars starts throughout Europe called the 30 Years' War. Okay? So ostensibly, it's a religious conflict between the Protestants and the Catholics, but there are lots of there are other underlying factors as well. Okay? Another factor is the Spaniards want to exert control over the Dutch. Okay? And so there's lots of different reasons, but the main thing you need to know is that millions and millions of people die. In fact, it is the deadliest war in Europe right before, up until the World War I. Okay? And so this creates anxiety in Europe, because if there's all this war and you're generating all this wealth, how do you keep this wealth secure, right? You're a merchant, you became very wealthy through trade by going to the East Indies and getting spices and come back to Europe and selling them. But if the Spanish or the French are going to send an army and steal everything, how do you keep your gold safe? Okay? So what's going to happen is this. What's going to happen is that the British and the Dutch are going to decide to get married. Okay? This is what we call the Glorious Revolution. 1688 Glorious Revolution. So let's talk about the Glorious Revolution. In the Glorious Revolution, what happens is that the British nobility invite William of Orange, who is a leader of the Dutch Republic, to come and become the monarch of Britain. Okay? And so you're like, okay, why would they do that? Why would they betray their own king, James II, and install a foreign monarch, William of Orange? Okay? And so the thing you need to understand is that throughout British history, what makes Britain unique is that the monarch has always been in conflict with the nobility. Okay? The king has always been in conflict with the oligarchs. And this is a continuous pattern. So ostensibly, the reason is religious, because James II was Catholic and Britain is a Protestant country. But the real reason is the nobility want to exert authority over the country, okay? So in this agreement, what would happen is that Parliament becomes the sovereign state, okay? It becomes the de facto power in England. And the king, William of Orange, agrees to be the puppet or the figurehead, but the real power is in Parliament. And so this creates the idea of national sovereignty. Okay? What people don't appreciate is that the real reason why they want to do that is they want to protect capital. Okay? Capital. Okay, or transnational. So the idea is that not only does William of Orange come over, but most of Dutch wealth come over. Because remember, at this time, the Dutch have a huge problem. They're constantly being invaded by Spain. So what you do is you take all the gold in the Dutch Republic and you transfer over it to England, okay? And so in 1694, they create something called a Bank of England. All right? And the Bank of England, the idea is this. The idea is that if you buy in the Bank of England, that gold is yours, okay? But the Bank of England will always be guaranteed by Parliament. All right, so this is a very important idea, guys. I need you to understand this for the rest of the semester, okay? So before, if you're a king and you need to go fight a war, you would borrow money from bankers and merchants, right? The problem, though, is that, one, you could lose the war, in which case, oops. Second is that you could die, in which case, oops. And the third problem is that you could just say, I'm king, I'm not going to give you back your money, okay? And so these merchants would have no choice but to try to create a revolution, okay? But as a merchant, as a capitalist, you don't want to go through this process. And so the Bank of England, it's really important because now you are lending money not to the king, but to the nation. Okay? What this means is that the nation has to pay you back. So even though the king dies, the people are liable for the debt. Okay, does that make sense? All right? So now, if you're a merchant, you feel safe. I can now put my money in the Bank of England. It's my money. If I lend it to the nation, I'm always guaranteed that they'll pay me back. Okay? And England is safe because, unlike the Dutch Republic, England is an island, and therefore it's protected by the Royal Navy. It's impossible for the French, the Habsburg Empire, or the Spanish to invade England. They've never been able to conquer England, and so it makes England safe, okay? All right? So now the question is, why would the Dutch, why would they put their money in England? Because remember, at this time, they can just screw you over, okay? So the way around this is you have some old techniques. You have intermarriage, right? And then you have religion, or what we call secret societies. Because remember, both the Dutch Republic and England are Calvinists, okay? And the major secret society that facilitated trade, of course, were the Freemasons. But during this time, these two were really between aristocrats. And the Bank of England was trying to get as much money as possible, right? So what they started to develop was a new concept. It's not a new concept, but they really systemized it. It's called contract law. All right, so there's a famous British philosopher named John Locke. And he said that what is government for? Government provides the inalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. All right? What that means is a government ensures you 3 rights. We will protect your safety. We'll make sure you won't die. Okay? We will make sure you have the right to do whatever you want, liberty, and also we will protect your private property. Okay? The entire purpose of Parliament and the courts, okay, the judicial system, is to ensure that your private property is protected no matter where your private property came from. Okay? Doesn't matter, they don't care what the origin of private property is. Okay? So like if you're French and you killed 1 million people to steal 1 million gold, they don't care. It's yours. It's private. Okay? If it's and they believe that this private property comes from God. All right? This is yours because God willed it to be yours, and we, England, must protect it. And they will do so through Parliament and through the court system. Okay? Does that make sense? So now, if you're wealthy in Europe, you're now encouraged to go invest in England. Okay? And this creates a concept that today we call offshore financial center, or OFC. Okay, so think of like Dubai or Hong Kong, where they don't care where the money comes from. Okay? Their legal system, the financial system will help protect this money. Okay? Also Switzerland. Okay, so Switzerland is a classic example. But England create this, and they base their entire nation around this idea. Okay? Now, the first major test to the system was Napoleon, because Napoleon was about to conquer Europe. And England couldn't have that, because if Napoleon conquers Europe, then Napoleon could control all the wealth of Europe. He could make sure that no wealth is transferred over to England. He could basically blockade England. So what Britain did was they financed 7 wars against Napoleon. And they lost 6 of these wars. And they won the last war, which created the British Empire. Okay? So now Britain is a global financial empire. Okay, so this is the East India Company. Okay? And the East Indian Company, it's based in Britain, and like the Bank of England, it is private. And what it does is it primarily engages in trade with India, as well as the East Indies, okay? So what England will do is they will colonize India and steal all the wealth of India, primarily by deindustrializing India. So India had textile factories, but England, through a lot of policies, just bankrupted the India textile industry and transferred it over to England, okay? So now what's going to happen is this. What's going to happen is that resources from India, okay, agricultural products, resources are going to transfer over to England. England is going to, with its factories, make goods for India. So basically, the entire deal is, we, Britain, give you India $10, and India, you give $1,000, okay? So basically, we give you $1 for the goods you give us, and then you pay us $1,000 for the goods we give you. Okay? So very quickly, this bankrupted England. But not only, this bankrupted India. Okay? But not only that, but you also had China as well. And the same idea was the opium went into China, and then silver and money went back to England. Okay? And then this money was allowed to go over to the United States. And the United States industrialized very quickly because of this policy. Now, the question is, how was England able to do this? How was England able to create a system in which India and China basically voluntarily gave up its wealth? And the answer is, England set up a game that incentivized the local elites to cooperate with England. Okay? So this is the way, this is what happened. So this is a map of the British Empire. Okay? So let's look at India and China. The local elites had to help the British do this, okay? The local elites had to help the British steal. The question then is, why would the local elites do that, okay? And the reason why is, remember from last class, the local elites are in conflict with each other anyway, okay? And what they're looking for is more power. And so what England said to local elites is, if you help us, we will help you steal the gold from this country. Okay, do you understand? Before, if you were an elite and you lost a war or the people didn't like you, they could kill you. But now, if you help the British, you can transfer your wealth and your children abroad. Okay, does that make sense? So, now what's going to happen is that the elite are going to be able to send their children and their wealth to the British Empire, okay? Okay? And there are certain mechanisms that allow them to accomplish this. The first mechanism is, of course, finance. Okay? So, not only are you allowed to transfer your capital to the United Kingdom and its colonies, but they will disguise it for you. This is what we call money laundering, okay? Money laundering. So when you steal from your people, not only will Britain allow you to do this, but they will disguise it for you, okay? Through their offshore financial centers, including Hong Kong, Singapore, their lawyers will pretend that this money came from, not from drugs, not from gambling, not from prostitution, but from restaurants, from real estate. Who cares, okay? But they'll clean up for you, okay? We call this money laundering. And then they will help you send it overseas where it becomes legitimate, okay? So now you have real estate investments in Australia or Canada, okay? All right? So this is a global money laundering system that encourages the local elites to be corrupt. Okay? It protects them in their corruption and it incentivizes them in their corruption. Okay? Does that make sense? The second thing that allows this to happen is schooling. Okay? So what do I mean by that? The British, when they conquered India and China, what they were trying to do is try to brainwash, indoctrinate the elite. So they set up these schools, right? And when you went to these schools, what did you learn? You learned English. But when you learn English, what do you learn? You learn that British culture is superior to your local culture, right? When you're learning English, you're learning about Shakespeare, you're learning about British philosophy, you're learning British history, and as a result, you slowly come to believe that the British are superior to us, and therefore I should try my best to be British. Okay? And also, what's really important is that the schooling system allows for mobility. Okay? So if you are a really smart person in China, well, there's really little mobility for you in China. But if you go for the British system, you might win a scholarship to go study at Oxford or Cambridge, okay? You even might become a Rhodes Scholar. So a Rhodes Scholar, it's basically a secret society, okay, guys? But the idea is that all over the British Empire, the very best students will be selected to go to Oxford, where they become best friends. Okay? And their mission will be to spread the power of the British Empire all around the world. And it works really well. Okay? This is an indoctrination system for local elites. And it works really well because remember, if you're a really smart person, the British offer you more opportunities for mobility than your own country. Because in your own country, the system is very hierarchical. It's static. There's really no mobility, right? But if you're really smart and you obey the British and you believe that the British culture is the very best in the world, you might become a Rhodes Scholar. And then you become part of the British Empire. Okay? And that's how the British were able to conquer the world. And the third thing, of course, is the Navy. Basically, the Navy ensured that Britain was the greatest military power in the world. If they didn't like you, they would come and destroy you, okay? That's what happened to China during the Opium Wars. There was nothing that could destroy the Navy. And so, these three things, okay? Finance, the Bank of England basically, schooling, or the idea of soft power, British culture, English, okay? And the third thing is the Navy created really the world's first great world empire. So as you can see, Britain spread all around the world. Okay? And so even though the British Empire is no longer around, it's now the American Empire, even though the opium trade has stopped, what's important for us to understand is the game is still being played today. Okay? So let me give you an example of this. This is the drug trade in the world, okay? And as you can see, the drug trade, okay, primarily cocaine. We're talking about cocaine. There are other types of drugs as well, but let's focus on cocaine. You can see it's a global network. Just like a lot of cocaine is produced in Colombia and South America, and then it just travels all around the world. It's a very sophisticated system of trade, okay? But what you need to understand is none of this would be possible without the British financial and legal system, okay? Because like, why are people taking such a risk and selling drugs? Because it's so lucrative, it's so profitable. But you can only have this market if it's being protected by a legal and financial system, okay? People only participate in this trade. It's dangerous, but they will only participate in this trade if they can be guaranteed that they can make a lot of money, and they can use this money and protect this money, okay? So what protects this money, of course, is the offshore financial centers, okay? So the green are areas in the world in which you can place your money. They won't ask where the money came from. They don't care where the money came from, and they will clean it up for you, okay? Money laundering. They will use their sophisticated legal and financial systems to clean up your money, and then they will help you invest it elsewhere, okay? Does it make sense? So guess what? Look at this, guys. Where are the major global financial offshore centers? Well, they're in the Caribbean, okay? They're in Panama. They are in Northern Europe. They are in the Middle East. They are in Southeast Asia. Hong Kong, Singapore, Japan. Guess what, guys? This used to be the former British Empire. Okay? So the British Empire is still around today. They transform from one that is overt, and that uses military power in order to control the world, to one that is covert, that is secret, and that uses financial and legal means in order to control the world. Okay? And it's still the game that we play today. All right? Now, there's a question that someone asked me. Okay, it's a very good question. The question is this: if offshore financial centers like Hong Kong and Dubai are so profitable, and it's such easy money, why doesn't everyone do it? Right? It's a good question, okay? And the logic is very simple. We know that gambling, prostitution, human trafficking, slavery, all profitable. Why doesn't everyone do it? Because it's immoral, okay? As a society, you need morality in order to create energy, openness, and cohesion, right? People want to feel as though there's part of something good, that we're striving for a higher cause. And if you're all about slavery or prostitution or gambling or money laundering, people won't feel good about themselves. In fact, their souls will become corrupted, okay? So the classic example is like Hong Kong, right? Have you guys been to Hong Kong? One of the wealthiest cities in the world, right? Lots and lots of skyscrapers. But guess what? The people there are disgusting. They're depraved, they're unethical, they're disgusting. There's absolutely no culture to the place. There's no morality to the place. It's absolutely disgusting, okay? I don't want to live there. And if you live there, guess what? Your soul is going to become corrupted. So this is almost, you would say this is a demonic system. This system is not only evil, but it facilitates evil. It is the work of Satan. Okay? But unfortunately, this is a system that we live in today. So even though everyone will say this system is demonic, it's really underpins the world today. Because if you think about it, okay, all this corrupt money from China, India, Malaysia, they go to these places, but then this money then goes where? It goes over to Australia to invest in real estate. Okay? Do you guys know what the biggest industry in Australia is? It's banking. Okay? Banking. Which means that Australia also engages in money laundering, but they clean it up so people aren't aware of this. Do you understand? The same thing happens in Canada as well. Canada, United States as well. So this entire world, it's based on stealing from the third world and transferring this money to the first world. That's all it is, okay? It's not complicated. But this has led to a huge problem. The problem is what we call over-financialization. But over-financialization, it's a very simple concept where there's too much money, so people become corrupt, lazy, arrogant, and insular. And that's what's happening in Canada, in the United States, in Britain, in Australia. Okay? And so really, an empire must collapse at some point. So the British, the Western world, they are a victim of their own success. Okay? So they stole all this money from the rest of the world, but this money has made their people lazy, corrupt, and arrogant. And that's why we're seeing so much conflict right now in the Western world, because this money has created a lot of inequality in the world, in the Western world, right? Where maybe 1% of all the money, 9% have very little to get by on. But you also have a lot of corruption, where the political system no longer serves the interests of the people. They only serve the interests of the rich, okay? And then you will also have immorality, where nowadays people only are concerned about making money. They no longer want to contribute to the community, okay? So yes, we can say that the Western world, it's evil because they've stolen all this money. But really what's happened is that they've corrupted and destroyed themselves because this model has been too successful for them. Okay? And that's why we're seeing so much chaos in the world today. So we are really at a game reset or a game's end. And a new game is about to emerge because this game right now is not sustainable. Okay? All right. Any questions? Yeah?
So if the success of Western world leads to the corruption and, the fall of Western world, can we generalize that, after success, people will fall? Then what's the meaning of success?
Okay, that's a great question, okay? So if we know that if you become successful, you will not be happy, why do people go and succeed? And, okay, this is a really hard question to answer, okay? So let me explain different layers. Okay, the first layer is this. Why? People know that wealth doesn't lead to happiness, right? What leads to happiness is family, love, community, meaning, purpose, generosity, okay? That's what leads to happiness. The happiest people in the world tend to be religious, they tend to have families, and they tend to be very kind-hearted people. So why do you have rich people? Because the game is structured so that everyone is forced to play. Okay? Meaning that we only care about people like Elon Musk or Jeff Bezos or Mark Zuckerberg. We worship the rich, okay? And we hate the poor. So if you're homeless, we think it's because you deserve it, because you're lazy. It's because you refuse to work, okay? So the game is set up so that we're focused on making money. Then the question then is, why do we have this stupid game? And the answer, unfortunately, is that what we figured out is that this game, in the short term, not in the long term, okay? We're talking like decades, not centuries. In the short term, it's what makes your people the most energetic, open, cohesive, and the most likely to win against other nation states. Okay, does that make sense? So in the long term, you get destroyed. Your people are destroyed. You're corrupted by this game. But in the short term, it allows you to defeat other players. Okay, that's how the British were able to create the empire, because they defeated the French, then they defeated the Germans, then they defeated the Russians. Okay? And that forces the other players to play this game as well. Because in the short term, this game gives you huge advantages. Okay? So think of, it's a zero-sum game. So think of an Olympic game where, okay, everyone's going and competing in the 100-meter sprint. And we know you shouldn't do drugs because drugs will destroy your body, right? And you could have a heart attack when you're 40. But they're like, no, I really want to win this game. So one guy uses a drug and he wins. And the other players know about this, and now they're forced to also use the same tactic. Okay, do you understand? So it's a really unfortunate system in that this system can only lead to the unhappiness, corruption, and immorality of people. But people are too concerned about short-term rewards. Okay? If you don't play this game, then you get eliminated. Okay? What I will discuss in the next class, okay, is the American Empire and how the American Empire changed this game. Right? So what the American Empire will do is they will add US dollars to this game. And it's important because it makes the game universal now, as well as easier to play. Okay? And then we'll look at how the system, capitalism, conquered the world. Okay? So it's a great question, but the reality is that if you cheat, if you do bad things, in the short term you will win out. Even though in the long term, it will lead to severe consequences for you and your people. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay? I mean, and it's also the same thing as like, rich people, right? Rich people, to get rich, they will sacrifice their children's happiness. They will sacrifice their own happiness. But they think that this will lead to happiness in the future. It won't, but they believe it, okay? So that's the great tragedy of this game. Okay? Does that make sense? Okay, good. Any more questions? Okay, good. So we'll continue this next class, okay?